Well, beautiful evening and welcome to the COVID-19 pandemic update. I'm Kayode Okikelu. First, the highlights. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says vaccine inequity is unacceptable and dangerous. Pledges 1 billion vaccines for Africa and the world within 9 months. Taraba State government moves to help farmers recover from pandemic losses, asks them not to engage in panic selling. On the foreign scene, Russian President Vladimir Putin gets booster shots of Sputnik V vaccine. Well, thank you for joining us today as we take you through all the vital updates on COVID-19 across Nigeria and the world. We're nearing the end of the World Antimicrobial Awareness Week, and I imagine the big question might be, what's antimicrobial anyway? Well, antimicrobials are medicines used to prevent and treat infections, but when they are misused or overused, they might not be as effective in treating the infections anymore. And at a time when the world is combating the COVID-19 virus, it's important to be vigilant. So if you're feeling unwell and you maybe get the urge to take an antibiotic, antiviral, or other antimicrobial medicines, please seek proper medical guide. We have more on that for you on the program today. But first, let's take a look at the latest COVID-19 trends.
57 additional persons in Nigeria have been recorded as positive for COVID-19 in the last 24 hours. According to the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, the latest figures were reported from 10 states and indicate a rise from the figures reported 24 hours earlier. Lagos had 30 cases, the highest number of infections in the report. Enugu had 9 cases, followed closely by Rivers with 7 cases. Kaduna and Osun had 3 cases each. 5 states reported just 1 case. They are Abia, Bauchi, Kano, Ogun, and Plateau. No new cases were reported from Ekiti, Ondo, Oyo, and Sokoto states. The total caseload in Nigeria has risen to 213,589. 32 more people were discharged, bringing the total number of recoveries to 206,518. There was 1 additional death from COVID-19 complications reported in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of deaths to 2,974. Currently, there are over 4,000 people on admission, while over 3.47 million samples have been tested. The latest update from the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency shows that over 6 million Nigerians have received a first shot of a COVID-19 vaccine, while over 3.4 million persons have been fully vaccinated. Globally, more than 7.4 billion vaccines have been administered. In Africa, there are more than 8.5 million confirmed cases and over 221,000 deaths recorded across countries on the continent. More than 257 million people all over the world have contracted COVID-19, while deaths are over 5.1 million.
The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has described as unacceptable and wrong vaccine inequity between developed and developing countries. In an exclusive interview with Channels Television's correspondent Mark Weogun Yusuf, the top diplomat announced that the U.S. will be distributing over 1 billion vaccines in the next 6 to 9 months around the world, including Africa. This, he says, will be done without any strings attached. He also says it's extremely important for increased manufacturing capacity for vaccines in Africa as one of the long-term solutions to addressing either this pandemic or other crises which may arise in future.
Vaccine inequity continues to, dominate the discussions. I know that the United States has been very supportive, providing over 7.5 million doses, available under the COVAX scheme and under other, bilaterally, so to speak. However, the inequity remains. I think just about 5% of Africa's population is vaccinated. Is there anything extra which the United States will be doing to help bridge the deficit?
Yes. For us, this inequity is unacceptable. It's wrong, but beyond being wrong, It's also incredibly dangerous, including for us, because as long as the virus is replicating somewhere, it may be mutating. As long as it's mutating and new variants arise, something may come along that defeats the existing vaccines. And so, frankly, it's in our interest, but it's also the right thing to do. So we have a commitment over the next 6 to 9 months. We will be donating around the world, including in Africa, a total of more than 1 billion vaccines. And we're doing that primarily through COVAX, so that it gets to countries most in need. And we're doing it without any political strings attached. Second, you may have heard just the other day that President Biden announced a major new investment in vaccine production to make sure that we have for the world the sufficient number of vaccines that will meet the need. Finally, one of the problems that we see in different countries, including here in Africa, including here in Nigeria, is the last mile problem. The vaccines may exist, we may have the right number, but getting shots into arms is the challenge. There are logistical problems, storage challenges, et cetera. We've developed something called the global COVID Corps that brings some of our most talented private sector companies to bring their expertise, working closely with partner countries to figure out what the problems are and to fix them. So all of these things will be happening. Last thing I'll say is this. It's really important that there be increased manufacturing capacity for vaccines in Africa. So whether that can happen in time to address the current pandemic, we'll see. We'd like to see that happen. But when we're thinking about the long term, making sure that there's production here so that when there is an outbreak, it can be addressed much more quickly, efficiently, effectively is really important.
Let's now speak with Professor Christian Happy, who's the director ACEGID, that's African Center for Excellence for Genomics of Infectious Diseases, Redeemers University. Well, he might be in Douala, Cameroon, but he and his team are operating, of course, from here in Nigeria, and he joins us this evening on the program. It's great to have you, Prof. Quite a number of developments to explore this evening. Antimicrobial resistance and how it concerns COVID-19. There's also the talk about local manufacturing and development of vaccines, which the Secretary of State just referenced, plus an emerging trend in the global health scene, which you call One Health. But let's begin with this. Your name came up over the weekend when the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, was speaking about some of the achievements of Nigerian scientists in the fight against COVID. One, for leading the team that carried out that very first genome sequencing of the virus in Africa, and two, for the virus groundbreaking rapid test, which costs around $3, much less than a PCR test. So I'd like to begin on that note because, I mean, it piqued a lot of people's interests. Are we mass producing this, this rapid kit, maybe like the lateral flow tests, which they have in the UK and the rest? What's the state of that one?
Yeah, the test is different from the lateral flow that you have in the US. It's actually the very first nucleic acid rapid test. So which means that it's not looking at, the test is not picking antibodies or antigen. This test is picking, the DNA or the RNA of the virus, and is a very first of its kind. And simply because it's using a novel technology called gene editing, to identify something, the RNA or the DNA specifically to the COVID-19 RNA of the COVID-19 virus, and it's also picking specifically the variant. And this test is really one of its kind, again, simply because, it is something that is done at room temperature. You do not need any skill to do it. Imagine a pregnancy test. My grandmother in her home, in my village, would do it. And she doesn't need to be educated to do it. So it is really a test that we developed for, our people and for Africans, and really would not need cold chain, and it's as cheap as the Vice President mentioned. And clearly, we have really transformed the way, Africa should respond to this epidemic or to this pandemic by really bringing solutions that are revolutionary. And this test is definitely being produced, but not at a scale that we would have loved to. And we're already talking to partners and then talking to people that are really interested. And this is, where the private sector in Africa should come into investment, investing into it so that we can actually produce millions of these tests. We are still doing it pretty rudimentarily in my lab at Redeemers University in Ede. But really, at this point, we need to scale this up to a point whereby we can actually produce millions. Yes, some people have shown interest, but really, we are not at a scale where it's being manufactured and then mass produced yet.
Well, we'll certainly look forward to that. But the Vice President also referenced the development of a Nigerian anti-COVID vaccine. And I know you've said that Africans will perhaps be more comfortable with an African vaccine. We just heard the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, also speaking about manufacturing. So regarding development on the one hand and manufacturing on the other, where are we?
Well, as you listen to the Vice President, we had this COVID-19 vaccine candidate that we produced as far back as September 2020. And the preclinical testing data were incredible. And we're glad to say that, yes, we do not have the resources to do the testing, in our country, but right now that testing is ongoing in the UK. And we're very proud of the fact that, with our collaborators at the University of Cambridge, we're changing the tide. And then this is definitely, if the resources are available, this is going to be the very first Africa COVID-19 vaccine.
So let's talk about One Health, Prof. I know it's a term that a lot of people may be hearing for the first time, wondering, what is this about? But in the context of COVID-19, because I know One Health has ramifications across board, but particularly for COVID-19, I know there was this, inaugural meeting which was held weeks ago. How does this improve the efficiency and perhaps the effectiveness of our fight against COVID-19? One Health, that is.
Of course, the One Health going forward is not just, it is an approach that has been existing, but really have not been used in order to respond to epidemic and then to pandemics. And then the new, it is clear now that, if you want to fight a disease or an infectious disease, you can't just look at the human component of the disease. The human live in an ecosystem, and that ecosystem is made of human, animals, and then the environment. So, and then most of the diseases that do have pandemic potential actually spill over often from animals to human. So how do you do disease surveillance if you are focusing only on human? And that's why we're now proposing, the One Health approach, which means that you have to focus on human health, animal health, and the environment. And that way, we can basically look at the whole ecosystem and work better in order to respond. Because it is very possible, think about it in the context of COVID-19, that animals could actually be infected from humans. And then imagine what goes on in the animal. What will happen, for instance, if a virus that has been picked up by animal from human undergoes some changes in the animal and then comes back to human. And that's the reason why the One Health approach is very important. Let's look at animal health, let's look at human health, let's look at the environment. And that's exactly what is the concept of One Health.
So when you talk about animals and humans and ensuring that we monitor on both planes, not just focus on one, Ebola comes to mind. And, they talk about how Ebola came from, humans to human beings. There's also, Lassa fever and the rest. So it sort of brings up that point. But for COVID-19, I recently came across some research. There's been talk about understanding where COVID-19 came from. And a lot of people had referenced, some erroneously, some without proof, that it came from animals. And just recently, some leaked emails came out referencing that might have been the case. But from a scientific point of view, you deal with facts and research. Have we hit a dead end, really, in trying to understand where COVID-19 came from?
Well, it is clear, from evidence and scientific evidence that is most likely would have come from animal and then spilled over to human. But there is really no evidence otherwise that is showing that, it came from a lab leak. It is not, nobody has provided such evidence, but there are abundant evidence on the other side demonstrating that this really is a spillover from animal reservoirs to human. So, and as such, that's what we tend to believe. But then remember that the WHO just created a scientific advisory group for, to investigate the origins of COVID and other infectious diseases, other pandemics. I am a member of that international scientific advisory group. We are 26 in the world. And then we really want to revisit, we're going to be revisiting that. And then obviously we will see. But I think the evidence, they're staring at us as at the moment. The scientific evidence is, are pointing toward the fact that it is a spillover from animal to human.
Professor Christian Happy, who joins us from Douala in Cameroon. By the way, he's there for a short assignment. He should be back soon. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. Happy to have you. I'm sorry I couldn't help that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
We'll go on a quick break now. When we return, we'll take a look at the COVID-19 response in Taraba State, plus what's happening in South Africa, where there are reports that the country is on the verge of a fourth wave. Do stay with us. You're welcome back. The Taraba State government says it has stepped up its support to farmers and other businesses to help them come out of the effect of the pandemic. While advising farmers not to sell all their farm produce to meet their needs, the State Commissioner for Agriculture and Natural Resources, David Kassa, asked residents to also reconsider lockdown should the pandemic rear its ugly head again, just as seen in other countries. So this formed part of his chat with journalists in Jalingo, the state capital, on the efforts made by the state government to get the economy back on its feet.
COVID has been a problem actually to all businesses, not just in the agricultural sector. And that is why we've stepped up our support to farmers, because you find out that most of them cannot afford seeds at the end of the day because of the previous lockdowns and so many measures put in place. It tends to affect the farmers directly. You understand, coupled with the insecurity. So that is what we've been trying to do, to see that we advise farmers not to really, because the impact of COVID has been on every systematic aspect of the value chain in farming sector and the agricultural sector. So it is time that we have to be cautious and to say, because there may be possibility of another lockdown. Some countries have gone back to lockdowns again, like Austria. Recently, I can hear from the media and everything. So we still have to trade with a lot of caution with regards to the COVID-19 pandemic. We advise our farmers always to be cautious because they have to save for the rainy days. And this is not the time to take all that you have produced in order to sell. At the end of the day, it could be very dangerous. We always advise them, like you rightly say, the state government, you always issue jingles to see that they control, they are cautioning farmers on not to go about selling their produce at the point of harvest, because it is not advisable at all.
Out of the country, where the Kenyan government plans to introduce a directive next month to prevent citizens who haven't been vaccinated against COVID-19 from receiving government services. Health Minister Mutahi Kagwe says unvaccinated people will be banned from public transport, local airlines, and train services. Kenyans will also require proof of vaccination in order to visit government institutions for education, immigration, tax, and other services. The directive will come into force on December the 21st. Kenya has a target of vaccinating 10 million people by the end of December. So that's in Kenya. But let's head over to South Africa now, where the government has projected a fourth wave of the pandemic is about to begin. The third largest economy in Africa, that's according to the World Bank, is ironically leading with most infections at almost 3 million. And there are questions as to what this fourth wave will mean. Ask Professor Jeffrey Mfalele, who's a Deputy VC Research and Innovation at Northwest University in South Africa. He joins us via Zoom this evening. It's great to have you on the program, Prof. Well, South Africa's health minister has said that a fourth wave is likely to hit from mid-December to early January. I wonder what you're looking at here. Is there a worst-case scenario?
This is most likely to happen because of two factors. The first is the virus, and then the second is actually the population immunity. So if you look at the virus, all the previous waves have been driven largely by the new or novel variants. So if we get a novel variant that can spread rapidly in the population, we will definitely experience the fourth wave. And the second thing is the population immunity. You will recall that the vaccines that we are using, they've been proven not to have a long-term immunity. So there is waning immunity. And at the moment, there are some countries which are already advocating for boosters. So that's one factor. And we also know that the natural infection does not guarantee you immunity as well. Cases of reinfections have been reported, and we know that you can also get waning immunity from reinfections. So these two factors combined obviously means that any country remains susceptible to subsequent waves of infection. The only thing that we don't know is the severity of the wave. We just hope that the fourth wave will be less severe.
Certainly, that's the hope, really. But you've talked about vaccination. We'll touch on that in a moment. But I just want to know as well, I mean, some countries are taking different routes to this. Some are going targeted lockdown. Some are just locking down certain groups, perhaps the unvaccinated and the rest. But looking at the previous trends in South Africa, what areas really are likely to be hit most by this fourth wave based on previous trends?
So most likely it's going to be the populated areas. We're already seeing flare-ups of cases in metropolitan areas, especially in Gauteng province, which is highly populated. We have got more than 15 million population in Gauteng province alone. And we also see some rise in infections in Western Cape, once again, metropolitan area. So I think that we are most likely to see the fourth wave emerging from these big cities. But the other factor that we need to take into account is the fact that in South Africa and probably many other African countries, we are heading towards the festive season. So the schools will be closed. People will be traveling to their home areas out of the metropolitan cities to predominantly rural provinces, and there will be a lot of movement. So all this combined will contribute to the fourth wave.
So clearly, we're not quite sure what to expect with this fourth wave. But on a final note, so the Minister of Health referenced natural immunity and vaccination, which is at 40%, that is number of adults who have taken their first dose. So in terms of vaccinations, ensuring that people get some sort of immunity, be it natural or vaccine-induced, what measures are being taken to improve vaccine update, particularly in South Africa? Is it coercion, persuasion, or a bit of both?
Is very much about persuasion from the government side, but we also see that in some sectors, especially the work environments, there is now a move towards mandatory vaccination. So it's not yet started. Most workplaces will start early next year. Those workplaces which are advocating for mandatory vaccination. So we will see if a mandatory vaccination will improve any vaccination coverage. But from the government side, the stance is that we need to persuade people to get the vaccine and really advocate on the benefits of vaccination.
Well, Professor Jeffrey Mfalele, it's been a pleasure speaking with you, and we wish you the very best with this fourth wave. It's said to be inevitable here as well, so we'll maybe compare notes in the coming days.
Thank you.
To Russia, where Russian President Vladimir Putin has received a booster jab using Russia's one-dose Sputnik Light vaccine. The 69-year-old was inoculated with his first jab of Russia's Sputnik V vaccine on March the 23rd, and the second on April the 14th, though at the time he refused to reveal which vaccine he had taken. Only 44% of Russia's population has partially been vaccinated against COVID-19, with an estimated 37% believed to be fully vaccinated. But here's more in the Global Update.
The Russian president taking an extra jab comes as number of cases rise across Europe and countries impose new lockdowns to curb the spread. Citizens in France's island of Guadeloupe have not taken kindly to. Last week, violence erupted after walkouts organized by the territory's labor unions to challenge local COVID-19 restrictions, such as mandatory vaccination of health workers, degenerated. Local police arrested 38 people and dozens of stores were looted. Austria powered down public life again today as its fourth national COVID-19 lockdown begins, making it the first Western European country to reimpose the drastic and unpopular measure this autumn in the face of surging coronavirus infections. In Salzburg, the famous Mozart Square could be seen deserted as local restaurant and cafe owners stored away their terrace furniture. The lockdown is similar to previous ones, but is the first to be introduced since vaccines became widely available.
Der Rolls-Royce. Und ich denke, das macht sehr deutlich, dass wir eben zwei sehr gute Impfstoffe, mRNA-Impfstoffe.
Germany's acting health minister, Jens Spahn, says the country will promote Moderna vaccine for Germans seeking booster shots as high demand for the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine risks depleting stocks and derailing efforts to tame a fourth wave of the pandemic. Spahn warned during a news conference that some 16 million Moderna doses could expire in the first quarter of next year if unused, adding that some experts see Moderna as the Rolls-Royce of vaccines, with BioNTech the Mercedes. Finally, Australia will allow foreign visa holders to enter the country from the start of December. So says Prime Minister Scott Morrison, as the country takes further steps to restart international travel and support the economy. Australia shut its international border in May 2020 and allowed only restricted numbers of citizens and permanent residents to enter in a bid to curtail the spread of COVID-19.
Or visit our website, channelstv.com, for more updates and a better understanding of the pandemic, plus other stories, all at your fingertips. The stories from politics, sports, business, and so much more. Well, that's the COVID-19 update. Thank you for watching. I'm Kayode Okikiolu. Remember to take responsibility.